Welcome to the M&A Unplugged podcast. Our mission is to help you be better prepared for your business acquisition or sale. Being prepared will ensure you maximize returns and minimize risks. This is M&A Unplugged with your host, Domenic Rinaldi.
Welcome back. I'm Domenic Rinaldi, host of the M&A Unplugged podcast. My guest today, Mark Walztoni, has over 30 years of HR mergers and acquisitions experience. He has seen it all and helped companies of all sizes plan for and manage their HR due diligence and integrations. He has also had to help lots of companies undo the mess caused by a botched integration. Integration is gaining more and more steam, and you'll hear Mark mention that more and more acquirers are now asking how to do integration these days compared to years ago where they were asking why. As we covered in an earlier episode with Jim Jeffries, over 70% of acquisitions fail to meet their ROI targets. Hopefully that stat gets your attention. Diligence and integration should have equal weighting in any acquisition. Mark shares his high-level formula for approaching this phase, along with how to avoid some of the common pitfalls. Mark is an expert in his field, and this episode will surely help you be prepared for your next acquisition. If you really want to avoid the common deal pitfalls and the risk of losing substantial dollars, you need to know how ready you really are to buy a business. Because I believe proper preparation is so critical to your deal success, we have published several free resources to help you be better prepared. You can access these resources on our website at k2advisor.com/resources. Being prepared is critical to ensuring that you maximize your returns and you minimize your risks. Thank you for being here and hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hey, Mark, welcome to M&A Unplugged. So happy to have you here.
Thanks, Domenic. I really appreciate you asking me to join. I'm a fan of the show, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you for that. So I'm really excited and interested to get into today's conversation, which is about integration, diligence, specifically related to the human capital piece. And, it's really been picking up steam, as I mentioned in my intro. I mean, integration and getting it right really matters. And more and more people are understanding that if you don't get that right, you've squandered your investment in a big way. And so we're going to dive into it. But before we do, maybe you can provide just a quick backgrounder on yourself and what you've done, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, so Domenic, I completely agree with you. I've noticed that myself. And what I base that on is really over 25 years as both chief HR officer for large organizations, and then another 15 years in the consulting world. I've always seen an interest in it, but very often the question was why. I think the question now is how.
What a great distinction. Why and now how. So that's confirmation that the needle's moving. It's getting through to people that you can't really get this wrong. And I myself have been involved in so many transactions. I've seen when it works well, and I've seen when it doesn't work well. And, not to get started off on a note where, people are going to go, oh my God, I'm never going to do a transaction. But do you have a horror story? Do you have an example that sticks out for you where you're like, oh my God, they got it wrong from an HR integration culture perspective? And maybe we can unpack that a bit.
Yeah, sure. And everyone has a train wreck story. So as you might imagine, mine are people related. I'd say often when I get involved, it's for merger repair. We didn't do HR due diligence. We've known them for a while, meaning the senior executives, and we just thought it was a fit. It's a culture fit at the high level, but maybe where the work needs to get done and how people treat customers and each other, it's a different situation. Or the culture operates one way when everything's steady state, but then you put pressure on it people start reacting in different ways because they're concerned, they're afraid. And who today wouldn't see an acquisition as just, one other brick in the backpack, one other thing to worry about? So one of the first ones that comes to mind is really a large acquisition where, again, there was overconfidence in, we really know these guys and we'll figure it out. So after the deal closed, then what they found were more people doing things in different places that they knew about. They also found that the certain executives were causing more turnover. And as a result, when the integration process started, people were really sitting up in the grandstand and saying, well, I'm just going to wait and see how this sorts out. I don't agree with this.
Right.
No one's talking to me about it. I'm just going to sit on the sidelines, which is the worst outcome.
Oh my goodness, without a doubt. And did the deal unravel as a result, or was it salvaged at the end of the day?
Yeah, it was salvaged in a sense. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Essentially, it was a redo of diligence after the deal was closed.
Yeah.
And a result, there was organization structure changes, leaders left the organization, and eventually, rather than being a standalone, the organization integrated into their company and essentially took pieces out of it. It wasn't what they wanted to do, but it was just at the point where they realized they can't run independently anymore.
Yeah. Wow. What a shame. What a shame. You put people's livelihoods at risk. You put your investment at risk. There's never a good outcome. So, Mark, I know you've got years and years of experience helping companies do this. Let's talk about the 3, 4, 5 things or the best practices when somebody's thinking about HR due diligence and integration. What should they be thinking about at the highest levels?
So at the highest level, and I'm glad you didn't let my youthful appearance fool you, Domenic. I've been doing this for a while. There's really 4 transitions people need to think about. I won't say worry about, think about. And one is kind of the basic org structure. Are the right people in the right jobs in the right locations? And this is one of those things that get back to being the best company, is that looking at that type of thing. And then also leadership selection again. Now you have, if you're going to have an integration, there's 2 people for each job. Maybe there's some jobs that are different. So you have to think about that specific change. And so if I was going to take that into due diligence, then you're looking at org chart structures, but you're also looking at something else. You're looking at key influencers. Where are the people that aren't really on the org chart per se at a higher level, but they're the ones that people go to ask questions. They're the ones that at the end of the day, Joe will say to Mary or Mary will say to Tom, what do you think about this thing? Is this for real? Is this going to happen? Am I going to lose my job? So it's looking at the organization in a traditional way, top down, command and control. And then it's also looking at it as a network. And that network has to include understanding the senior managers, because they're going to, the middle managers, because they're going to be key to the actual deal getting done. And part of the reason I say that, I'm just going to jump to the second one here, is the employee transition. And you pointed it out earlier, Domenic. The first question is, what's in it for me? And the second one is, what's needed from me? And that then gets to the fear and anxiety piece of this. It's the actual employee transition. So one of the things to look at there is what's changing for whom and how. There's going to be change, but where are the areas? So for example, are the salespeople going from individual selling to more of a team sale model? Is their compensation going to change? That's going to be a tremendous hit in terms of something to manage. And then how are you going to communicate during that change? Because people are going to go through endings. What did I have in the other organization I don't have now? What's beginning for me? And hopefully there's some things there people get motivated about. And then there's that whole messy middle. Some people call it wandering in the wilderness. And I think if you're focusing on that individual change, people are going to get through that wilderness quicker, and they're not going to have as big of a drop in productivity. Mm-hmm. So those are two things. Again, the organization, the individuals, and then on the culture side. And there's a lot of definitions of culture and values, attitudes that I try to look at it from a behavior standpoint. What do people actually do? So it's getting evidence in due diligence of how things are written, employee handbooks, communications, how often does the management communicate, and how top-down email to everyone. Is it something where there's town halls and there's feedback and all those things? Because that's really going to give a sense of what can be improved, and also what can really show employees that there's some good things happening. There's some good changes.
Yeah.
So very critical. And then the fourth piece, and I think in a lot of ways, Domenic, this is where people really understand the acquisition process and integration almost more than any other step. And that is who's getting hired, who's getting promoted, who's getting listened to, and who's getting terminated. Mm. Because those are the things, get the message aside, this is the actual evidence of who is, what type of personality, what type of leadership style is really the one that matters in the combined organization. Yeah. That's an awful lot, but if I'm boiling it down again, I would say it's change, culture, capabilities. Do people have the capabilities to do what's necessary in the integration process as well?
Yeah. I think those are great points. I especially love the key influencer comment, because in every organization there's the management team, and then there are the people that folks go to, that they really rely on, and maybe they don't even have a management role, but they're sort of just in the know and they influence thinking, or they have somebody's ear in management. And I think that's a really good point.
So just a couple practical ideas on that, Domenic, is often after I work with the clients to identify some of these folks, we bring them in to under the tent to pre-screen employee communications. We review FAQs with them. We use them as listening posts, and we develop messages for them. It's a two-way communication. But it may be some of the bullets that at the senior management level are, at the 10,000 foot level. But then the key influencers, they're right on the shop floor. So we really actively involve them. And we also bring them in if it's a large enough acquisition where you have a project management office and work teams. We be sure to get the key influencers on some of those teams, because then when someone says, hey, I don't know, I haven't heard anything, I don't know what's happening, you have someone who has either knows it from experience and being on a team, or they're hearing the key messages and what's next in person from a group. Just a key area. And I would also say too, and it's completely understandable, if we think about change, endings and beginnings, by the time the deal closes, all the senior executives have been through that entire cycle themselves. They know what's going to happen to them. They know what's in it for them, all those things. So to some extent, they're kind of done on day one.
Yeah.
Whereas the average employee maybe is just
Yeah.
they're still in that "what just happened to me" stage.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and senior managers can't forget about that, right? They can't forget that they're in the know, whether they're, recapitalizing and they've got rollover equity and they're going to continue with the new entity, or they're exiting stage left and they're leaving it to a new management team. They understand that. They know what hand they're playing, but the employees don't. And it's so critical, and Mark, it's so interesting because, I've seen so many deals,
Mhm.
and there's a couple that come to mind. Recently I had a client who went out and acquired a company to diversify.
Mhm.
And they really took the time to go through the integration and think about the people and how they were going to, and they were moving the operation into their facility. So it
Mhm.
wasn't like they were just taking over an operation and it was going to
Sure.
be standalone. They were moving people. And to their credit, they nailed it. They kept every single one of the employees, except for the people who didn't want to come, who opted out of moving to the new entity because they
Sure.
were ready to retire or what. And fast forward to today, that business is doing incredibly well. It's been incredibly accretive. They've kept everybody and they have now a seamless operation. And I compare that to another situation that we had where a corporate entity came in, took over an operation, was left it in its facility,
Mhm.
but came in and mandated all of these changes based on the way they did business,
Sure.
completely ignoring how that business operated and dealt with its clients and what that business's clients were used to.
Yeah.
And it will not shock you, but that business was a fraction of itself a year later. I think it
Yeah.
had declined by almost 80%.
Mm.
And here's how you know it wasn't the business, it was really the folks who bought it. The old management team bought it back and
Uh,
brought it right back to where it was before.
yeah. I've certainly
So
seen
there's
those.
a crazy example, but go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy but true. And I guess the lesson learned that pops out of there for me, and I've seen it as well, is yeah, really starting with that deal thesis and looking at the secret sauce,
Yeah.
especially for more of an early stage deal,
Yeah.
because I guess that's one of the primary risks is killing that golden goose,
Yeah.
and then thinking about what's the integration strategy. Because if it's going to be a standalone, maybe the whole cultural shift and all those things is really going to be more at the level of the senior executives, because not much is going to be changing for other people.
Yeah.
But then full integration, like your first example, change in facility, perhaps change in supervision, certainly then visibility, integration. That's that's the piece on the deal that says it's going to be really important to look at all those factors and come up with a plan. Again, communications, culture change, and capabilities.
Yeah. And the stakes are high. I had Jim Jeffries on not too long ago,
Sure.
and he talked about how 70% of acquisitions miss their ROI targets.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean they don't return ROI. It just means they miss their targets. The stakes are high. I mean, that's an incredible percentage to be missing their ROI targets. So it tells you there's more to be done in this area of integration, and especially when it comes to the people.
I believe so. And again, when I think about people, one of the questions to ask is how important is people adoption to the deal?
Yeah.
And if something's an add-on, maybe adoption doesn't mean as much to 80% of the employees. But then if the deal's not going to work unless everyone is, if not on board, ideally not only on board but committed and engaged,
Right.
then that's where the level of effort goes up. And that's when I think really the deep dive is important too up front. And even in organizing a project management office, sometimes I'm supporting a project management office on a change, communications, and HR work stream. Sometimes on a smaller deal, I'm just advising a senior executive because they want to be perceived as, and accurately so, as the person who's up front. And they're not looking for a consultant per se, but they recognize that they need a sounding board and someone who's can see the patterns, versus relying on a toolkit. The best tools and templates, we can all find those on the internet, right?
Yep.
But as far as actually seeing it, that's a different animal.
So Mark, I want to shift gears just a little bit.
Sure.
Our audience runs the gamut, from companies who have an HR department who can manage, some of this integration stuff, to folks who don't have an HR department, don't even have a head of HR.
Sure.
I want to attack the companies first who have, HR talent and a management team and infrastructure. What is your sense? Are HR groups gaining the knowledge and the expertise to do this themselves, or are they having to pull in experts like yourself for certain pieces? I mean, where's the evolution from an HR perspective and their skill set when it comes to M&A?
Yeah, so I think in M&A, whether it's HR or any other group, it's the number of times you've done it before. It's the battle tested person. So the way what I typically see is one situation, they've never done it before, and that's less there. But so then they want to bring in an advisor to help make sense, right? Again, patterns, toolkits, roadmaps, all those things. The second piece is they've done it before and it was a disaster. It was a train wreck. And maybe they didn't even integrate the past company. They just gave up and left it there. So they're almost looking to do two things. And then the third is they're a well-oiled machine. Everybody knows what to do. But it's a bandwidth problem. They've got too many deals going on. So I see HR people who haven't done it before. And, they're looking to improve their capabilities or get that perspective for multiple deals. Or the second one, the train wreck, is, there's some lessons learned, and maybe they in the organization in the back of their mind are thinking, this is a company or a career killer. Yeah. So I want to do it that better that way. So I think the difference between an effective and an ineffective HR person, all other things being equal, is just number of deals.
Yeah, got it. So let's talk to the folks out in the community who don't have an HR function, don't have that specific expertise in-house. Sure. They may or may not have a lead on integration.
Yeah.
What should they be thinking about and doing as it relates to this function?
I think the primary thing they should do, and I know this is a challenge with day jobs, is pick someone who is accountable.
Yeah.
And a good business person will be able to hit all those HR check boxes on, maybe not on a mega deal, but on most deals. Yeah. Simply because a lot of it is, just good business sense. If it's something like, oh, there's a defined benefit program here, or a pension plan, or well, sure, you can find a specialist for that. Right. I think accountability is the key, and I know that's a challenge with a day job, but I think that's the one single thing. And maybe the person you put in that job isn't the person someone won't miss because maybe they're not contributing as well. It's someone that you're looking for to test maybe for that next position.
Yeah.
Get a high potential, put them in there, and they may need some external support or not, but because of the way they are, and that this is again a career maker for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that provides the focus a company needs.
I think that's an awesome point. You have to have somebody at the end of the day who owns the integration.
Yes.
The buck stops with them, and they have to have the authority to make stuff happen, right?
Yes.
And what I see too often is pieces get parceled out.
Mm-hmm.
You're responsible for IT, so the head of IT is going to take over just IT, and then you're giving your production folks responsibility for production, and it's scattered everywhere.
Yes.
And nobody really owns what's happening, and nobody's working on the same timelines, and they try their best to come together and talk about it, but nobody really owns it. And I think that's a great point.
And that's, just a disconnect where there is a steering committee of senior executives is a larger deal. And maybe there's a meeting once a week. But if that person who's running the integration management office doesn't have the authority or can't get airtime other than once a week, because, red flags come up, they don't just wait for Friday morning at 10 o'clock.
Right.
And then all of a sudden things start getting reversed. Because I think the head of whomever is responsible also needs to understand the organization and the people so well that they know how things get done.
Yeah.
And they're involved with the deal, ideally as early as possible, because then they understand the reason for the deal and all those other things. So, yeah, I think governance, if it's too complex, gets in the way, but especially if it's the least objectionable person gets control of the project management office.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able, because really, if they can't work across boundaries and they aren't respected in order to, push what needs to be pushed, it's going to be a bureaucratic office.
Yeah. Yeah. And no discussion about this would be complete unless we sort of, brushed on, and I think it's early stages, right? So yeah. I understand that our thinking might be evolving, but, with COVID and the pandemic and companies now, running virtually and with distributed workforces, this is adding a whole new element to how you evaluate, the effectiveness of your talent. And, that network that we talked about earlier with the influencers, I mean, that could shift. I mean, it could be hard to really find those folks. So any advice, for folks that are doing due diligence now and what they need to be thinking about with, virtual employees and distributed workforces?
Sure. Yeah, I think I think there's a couple different cuts at it. And one maybe is the technology side of it. If your own technology, how long did it take the organization to move people to that remote environment, and how well is the technology enabling that change? And I think the other piece is thinking about retention, because if someone's doing, let's say it's an accounting task. If they're doing it for one company, but it's similar to the functions they perform somewhere else, it loses the human connection and that notion of the culture. I mean, if I'm doing it for A, why can't I do it for B if B offers me more money? I used to care about my team. I used to spend time with my boss, but now I'm at a Zoom meeting, 30 minutes a week, and it breaks that bond. So I think there's the retention piece there.
Yeah.
And then there's also, and I built this into due diligence, is looking at COVID policies and procedures for returning to work. Simply because that can involve liabilities as well.
Right.
So again, and then I think also the capabilities, and this goes to culture too, Domenic, is some cultures are, especially that, a fun culture, we go out once a week, and that creates a certain bond. Not all leaders can lead remote employees though.
Yeah.
And I think that's another area where as as things go on and what's been demonstrated so far, there's not going to be the old normal is unlikely.
Yes.
Better off we prepare for the new normal.
Right.
And that means that I think leaders have to take different approaches.
Yeah.
They have to find out what's the right time of the day to communicate with certain people. It may not be 12 to 1. It may not be scheduling hour meetings. It may be 50-minute meetings so people can get to their next area. But then feedback. And I think this is critical, because the more people feel marooned, the less likely they're going to be at the same level of performance and again, be a retention risk.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think you're right. I mean, I think management teams are going to have to learn new skill sets, right? Learning to manage remotely, personally speaking, I prefer it because if done right, you really focus on the right things. You focus on the outputs and the performance, and not so much about what you see or hear, which, sometimes clouds your judgment about what's really happening at the end of the day and who's being effective and who isn't. Who's controlling the water cooler and appears to be productive, but really not, So we started with, a story about, where maybe, integration didn't work so great. Maybe, do you have a story we can end on here as we start to close up? One that worked really well and why it worked well?
Sure. The one I'm thinking about is a smaller acquisition, it depends on the definition of small, but let's say it's about 100 people.
Yeah.
And I think on this one, specifically, there was a recognition that one company really needed the sales force from the other company. That was their success factor in the deal. And I remember talking to a client who said, I'm not looking to cut heads. We sell basically the same things. So there's really not much there's no reason to do this deal if we can't integrate our sales forces.
Yeah.
And so the process of that was looking at how they were compensated. And one was 100K base, 10 levels of incentives. The other was eat what you kill, straight commission. Interestingly enough, the acquirer was eat what you kill, straight commission. So the fear was right away, wow, when we come in, the best salespeople are going to just jump. So there was a lot up front, starting early in due diligence, on looking at the sales rep results, identifying the ones that are in that top 20%, and then developing individual retention plans. And essentially, the primary campaign around retention was about that group because it was so key.
Wow.
And then in compensation to say, well, what we have to do is show them an opportunity to make more than they're making now, but also give them a bridge because they plan their kids' tuition and their mortgage on base salaries. So there was a 1-year transition where it was a best of plan, interestingly enough. And what they found is that the rest of the companies came together well. They're very similar in terms of their customers and that, but they were able to retain the salespeople. And they also thought that if they had waited till close, again, the headhunters would have been managing their retention process, right? And it wouldn't have been to their favor. So they identified the secret sauce. They got in there early with the risk management plan. And then by the time the deal was announced, all the individuals that were key, they had someone assigned to talk to them, be kind of their coach, onboarding coach, if you will. So they really, really wound it all together, and that credit really goes to the head of sales for the acquiring organization.
Yeah,
he saw what happens when it didn't work.
Well, and they had the right advisor too, right?
Yeah. Well,
take some credit there where credit's due.
I appreciate that, but the client always gets the credit.
Yeah,
You know
fair
that.
enough. Mark, this has been great. I'm gonna one final question before we wrap up here. Is there a question that I didn't ask you that would be really helpful for folks in the audience to have heard?
I think I want to go back to one we talked about a little bit.
Okay.
But it's this notion of culture. So you mentioned Jim Jeffries, and you mentioned this 50 to 70% of why deals fail.
Yeah.
The answer to that, if you're reading a lot of those articles, starting with the original Harvard Business Review one, it was culture. Culture wasn't a fit. So where can that be a false assumption? It's the definition of culture. It may be that leaders couldn't get along with the other leaders. It could be that the compensation pot wasn't right. It could be they didn't communicate. But the culture piece can be a get out of jail free card. So I would say if in any situation where culture comes up as, oh, there's a culture problem in this, it's got to be practical and pragmatic in terms of what that really means, you know. And again, I just use the how people treat each other and customers and how they do that normally and under stress, who they promote, who they hire, who they fire. That's where culture really matters.
Yeah.
A lot of it today can be white noise. So again, just tying those two things together of why deals fail and culture, you really got to peel that onion, I think.
Got it. It's like it's easy to blame the youngest sibling because they can't really stick up for themselves. So
yeah, that's exactly right.
You point to culture because why not?
The culture did it.
It's an easy thing to do, right?
Yeah, that's right. And the paradox is that when you go down that level to what you observe and behaviors and the physical evidence, and which starts to come out in due diligence, you know, you're able to get a bead pretty quickly, I think, on that whole human dimension. So anyway.
I think it's great. I think it's great advice. Got to peel back the onion. Don't let people get off the hook so easy.
Yeah, absolutely. And accountability as well, which we talked about.
Yeah. Mark, this has been tremendous. It was such a pleasure to have you here. If folks wanted to get in touch with you, how could they reach you?
Well, the best way they can reach me is at my email address, which is Mark, M-A-R-K, .Walztoni, W-A-L-Z-T-O-N-I, at crow.com. Or they can just give me a call at 616-550-5945. And I'm happy to chat about things, share experiences. We'll learn from each other, and if there's a path forward, we'll know that too.
Awesome. All right, Mark. Thanks again for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Domenic. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. All of today's information will be available in the show notes. If you enjoy our content, please remember to subscribe and review our podcast. I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the M&A Unplugged podcast. And until then, please remember that scaling, acquiring, or selling a business takes time, preparation, and the proper knowledge.